Chances are, if you ask someone what their first Fire Emblem game was, they'll usually answer either Fire Emblem 7 or Fire Emblem Awakening, with Awakening being a lot of the common answers. If you were to ask me this question, of course, I would also answer with Fire Emblem Awakening. I remember receiving it for Christmas and just absolutely playing the ever-loving shit out of it. Now, I'm not entirely sure if you could tell, but fantasy is my favorite genre of basically anything. Legend of Drizzt, Berserk, Lord of the Rings, I love them all equally. Fire Emblem is no exception to this, and since I've been able to either find a playthrough of or actually play through myself basically every Western Fire Emblem game, as well as play through both FE4, half of it anyways, and FE6, I've come to the conclusion that the Fire Emblem series offers a wide array of tactical gameplay, as well as a very different take on stories depending on which game you're playing. Well, I may sound a little scatterbrained here in the intro, but I was actually able to find the time to replay Awakening over the summer, and it's gotten me thinking that perhaps we hate a bit too much on Fates, or the newer games in general, and not give them credit for something that they did right. Now, going through Awakening again has allowed me to look at it with a more critical eye and see it for what it's worth rather than what it disappointed me on regarding the older games in the context. And while in both my mind and that of many others, Awakening pales in comparison to the GBA trilogy and, of course, the holy god that is FE4. And the simple fact of the matter is, Awakening was actually a breath of fresh air when it came to the RPGs that were being released alongside it, as when you really think about it, Awakening is a truly classic RPG, even if it is from a series that is relatively little known up till that point. Final Fantasy was out there becoming a cyberpunk shitshow, and Xenoblade Chronicles was doing well for itself, but it didn't have that old medieval style that seemed to be lost with the end of the SNES golden age of RPGs. I think Awakening filled a void for many people, myself included, who hail it as just one of the greatest games of its year because how familiar it was, yet different at the same time. Basically what I'm saying is a bunch of Final Fantasy fans discovered what Fire Emblem was and thought that they had been gifted with a new great thing from the heavens. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. So, for the all-important thesis statement of the day, we're going to take an objective look at Awakening and see how well it holds up now that we have a benchmark to put it against in the category of modern Fire Emblem. Additionally, I think this will probably be the first sort of formal review style video on my channel, so I guess you can say that this was an experiment worth doing. Just like Awakening. How poetically fitting. If there's certainly one thing I can commend Awakening on, it's definitely not its plot. While Awakening's plot did have some moments of grandeur, such as the scene right after Emerald died, the chapter with Mustafa specifically sticks out in my mind as sort of the big point where Awakening felt like there was actual stakes and there was something going on in the story that kept me engaged. Now, with that being said, however, it doesn't mean you can't have a bad plot and still make it interesting, as Awakening's plot is less so driven by the plot itself and more so driven by the characters included therein. This is where I think Fates falls flat on its face compared to Awakening, in the sense that Fates needed a plot to drive its message home, whilst Awakening didn't. Awakening was just a fun romp through a Fire Emblem world with some quirky characters in it, and that's all it set out to be, and that's exactly what it achieved. So in my mind, it's a complete win when it comes to this scenario. Now, while I have brought up the argument before, the fact that a lot of Awakening's characters are just really dumb anime tropes that are completely overused within the genre, you know what? I think for what Awakening was trying to be, with its trying to appeal to a wider audience and such, it works to Awakening's favor in this case, and I think it was a good move on the developer's part, because it allowed us to have probably one of the most memorable casts in all of Fire Emblem. Second in my mind only to, of course, Sacred Stones and a lot of the characters who stuck out to me from Path of Radiance. Awakening's plot can be easily separated into 3 basic arcs. Firstly, the Gangrel Arc, which serves as basically your Lin's mode sort of type thing, where it teaches the player the basics of Fire Emblem and eases the player into the difficulty curve. Then you have my personal favorite, the Valm arc, because even though the villains were even worse in the Valm arc, Valm actually felt a lot like a classic Fire Emblem just in terms of gameplay rather than story, so I commend it for that because Valm felt like where the most effort was put into map design and chapter-wise. And then you of course have the Grimleal arc, which takes place at the end of the game and gives us probably one of the worst plot twists in Fire Emblem history, until Fates came out, but that's, again, a can of worms for another day. Again, I can't stress how much Awakening's plot is biased towards its characters rather than the actual arc. And one of the big contributing factors to this is the revamped support system and the addition of Robin, who, as I like to call him, Mark if he gave a damn. By not only allowing characters to have unlimited supports, they've also allowed characters to support many more characters than they have in previous games, and while this did lead to some conversations coming across as filler and just put there because, we had to do this conversation between these 2 characters, a lot of them are actually rather heartwarming and very well written, even though they aren't quite as deeply political and thought-provoking as conversations or plot points in the older games were. There's still a lot of good stuff here, from downright tragic, to entertaining, to upbeat and heartwarming. It's all good stuff, and Fire Emblem Awakening shines in this respect. Now, I went into Awakening with a bit of prior knowledge as to what I was getting into, so I was well aware that you could marry 2 units to have a child, which, by the way, is an excellent gameplay mechanic. Now, of course, with the addition of an avatar character who can support as well, this led to a lot of dating simulator and waifu jokes, which honestly I'm perfectly fine with, because here in Awakening, the whole marriage thing is just a side thing, a distraction. Now, I have my own opinions about how it was implemented again in Fates, but again, that's a rant for another day. In here, it's fine, because it's a fun little distraction, and the memes that came out of it were just too wonderful, especially when you consider, oh my. But yeah, all in all, even with its weakish plot, Awakening's characters more than make up for it, because the parent units are entertaining, and the child units are just funny as all hell, so it keeps you engaged that way. So I think I'll give Awakening a pass, given that. When it comes to Awakening's gameplay, there really aren't many surprises here. It's Fire Emblem after all. What did you expect? Enemy units are suddenly green? Yeah, that'll never happen. As always, your units are still in blue and enemy units are still in red. Your units can still only move a certain amount of squares on the battlefield, standard Fire Emblem fare. Additionally, skills make a return in Fire Emblem Awakening, and as with every game in the Monster Hunter series, having one armor set that completely destroys everything else, Fire Emblem also has one skill in every game that completely botches every semblance of balance. This skill is, of course, Gale Force in Fire Emblem Awakening, which is pretty much the Wrath, Silencer, basically every offensive skill from Tellius equivalent in Fire Emblem Awakening. It is learned by the Dark Flyer class at level 15 and is definitely a skill you want to look out for if you're optimizing skill sets, but this is not something I personally do myself. I just play through the game without reclassing, which, speaking of, Awakening's major change that it introduced was, of course, the addition of reclassing. While also being present in both Shadow Dragon and New Mystery of the Emblem, Awakening refined it so that it was much simpler and more straightforward to use. This also in turn made it busted as all hell, but thankfully Fates was able to fix that later on, and it has been remedied ever since. But Awakening still had this really unbalanced class system. This created the ability to create crazy skill sets for characters that are just out of this world broken, which I think contributed a lot to the reason that Awakening did not have online play. Which, speaking of, being on the 3DS, Awakening benefits from having two major things additionally added to the gameplay as extras. The first of which, tied to the avatar system, is of course Streetpass, which allows your character's avatar and a set of your units to battle against an enemy-controlled AI version of that character's saved team, which I think is pretty cool and a good addition. Additionally, Awakening had a ton of DLC maps, which, apart from getting you some awesome classic characters like Lyn or Ephraim or Hector or whatever, if you didn't think Awakening was much of an anime before, hey, you ain't seen jack shit yet. Now, if you were to ask my favorite thing about Awakening, that would definitely be the soundtrack. This game has a score to behold, because good lord, not only does it include amazing remixes and remasters of some of the best songs from previous games, but some of the mashups and the new songs are just, oh, they're so amazing. Awakening's soundtrack really brought Fire Emblem, I think, into the level of Zelda's soundtrack. It's that damn good. Again, my favorite piece among Awakening's collection is, of course, Old Battlefield, which coincidentally is the music that you're listening to right now in the background. The last thing I want to quickly mention regarding gameplay and just how the game feels in general is the art style. Now, the art style of Awakening, I think, is alright. It's definitely got a very anime look to it. Additionally, this also affects the maps and chapters. While I feel that a lot of the maps had really bland design chapter-wise, they made up for the fact that a lot of Awakening's chapters did have really awesome set pieces, from the giant bones in Plegia to the Midmire with its rain and all that. So I think a lot of the game's direction was pushed more towards the art side of things as opposed to the map design side of things, which is kind of sad because a lot of Fates' map design I thought was really good, aside from a few iffy maps in Revelation. So it's again good to know that Intelligent Systems is definitely listening to criticism from both the fans and the major review outlets. Where I think Awakening most definitely excels is completely in its art style, soundtrack, and game design, which was probably one of the better or more standout game design, art styles, and soundtracks in the series until Fates came around, and basically made everything that Awakening had better in terms of gameplay and soundtrack. Now, granted, it did kind of make the whole story situation a bit worse, but we're talking about Awakening, not Fates, so I don't think any more hate towards that is warranted. With that being said, I think it's time I should move on to my closing thoughts about this game and what I really think about it. Is Awakening a terrible game? No, it's not. Is it a terrible Fire Emblem game? Probably. Do I hate it? No. You can hate something that's good or like something that's bad. I don't really care at the end of the day. Awakening has been my guilty pleasure and possibly the most nostalgic game in the series for me because it's what introduced me to all of the more amazing titles that came before. So I thank Awakening for bringing me into this series and getting me hooked on the Fire Emblem as a whole, as without it I wouldn't be able to experience the fall of Lion or the amazing arc that Eliwood went through in Blazing Sword. It's thanks to Awakening that these kind of moments were possible for me, and it gave me that access into a game that I had never gone through before. And hey, you know what? I can commend Awakening for that. And that's possibly the best thing I could ever praise it on, even with its total mediocrity when you consider everything that came before it and how much of a letdown it probably was to the classic fanbase. But until next time, I have been ZerkMonsterHunter 4. Thank you for watching, and no matter what games you like to play, happy hunting.